results. You keep getting drama. You keep getting accidents, headache.
Some people enjoy the drama. We got somebody here.
Hello.
Hello.
Salam. Hello.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum. Are you hearing me?
Wa
We
alaikum
can
salam.
hear you.
How are you, sister?
Okay, super. I have a question. I'm good, thank you. Alhamdulillah. How about you?
Alhamdulillah, we're good. What was your question?
I have a question regarding objective morality. I understood that without it, without believing in God, without God, you cannot have like right and wrong, and like good and bad become like very subjective and very modifiable, if I can say that.
Yeah.
But someone said to me that at the end, objective morality is subjective because there are many religions, many morals. So at the end, your faith is subjective. So how can we deal with this argument?
Yeah, so this is not that difficult. So it's not. The typical thing is, oh, there's so many religions, and how do you? Well, they might not all be right. First of all, we don't think they are, and even if there is some truth in some of them, like for example, let's say we're right, and I really do think we are. Islam is the truth, and Islam says X. You do have overlap in some cases. You go to some other nations and you might see remnants of that. And simply because there is a difference of opinion in a particular thing, it doesn't mean that one isn't right at all. You have differences of different theories in the scientific community, for example. You don't just then throw out them all out the window and say, oh, there's different theories about how to deal with these particular issues in quantum mechanics, so therefore they're all subjective. It's just a silly response. It's not as simple as that. No, someone might be in the process of trying to explore a particular problem, and one of them might be the right answer, and it might come out much later in time that one of them is the right answer and the others are false. But it doesn't follow from that they're all subjective at all. Now, with regards to objectivity, for me, ethics is more about who has the right to give a particular command. Now, some atheists will say, oh, but your religion is saying that God decides what is good and what is evil, and God is quote unquote a subject. So it's really just subjective then still, because you have a subject giving you commands. Now, the issue here is that it completely overlooks why we say subjective morality is bad when we leave it to humans to decide. So if you're looking at things like communism and like the crap that sort of came out with, or just an individual and he's saying, I decide what is good or bad. The reason we say that subjective morality is problematic, because the person that's giving the command or giving the proposition X is good or X is bad based on his own whims is finite. He has limited scope. What's going on? He has limited scope. So he can only see so far into the future, if at all. Like someone playing a chess game, you can only predict so many things. You can only see so many moves, and your knowledge is limited. You only know so many things. Now, if you want to say, that's why we say human morality, when it's subjective, is problematic, because the human is finite, and the human has to deal with all of these desires and all of these whims and all of these corruptions that like plague them. That's why, quote unquote, subjective morality, when we apply it as a criticism to an atheist or to these sort of human decided moral systems, that's why we say it's problematic. Now, if you want to call God a subject simply because he could be, because he has a point of view or a perspective, and it's a godly one, he's all knowing, he's all seeing, he's all hearing, these attributes don't apply to the human. And the things that we said subjective reality, why they're problematic for the human being, they don't extrapolate to Allah Azza wa Jal at all, because he isn't stuck in that finite perspective that we are. He isn't limited in his knowledge. He is the all-knowing. He isn't limited in terms of his foresight. He knows what's going to occur. He isn't limited in terms of what he can hear and what he can see. He's the all-hearing. He's the all-seeing. Nothing escapes him. So like, although you might try to reduce this concept subjectivity to something meaningless, where you're not applying the reasons why we consider it problematic, then it's pointless to even talk about objective and subjective at that point, because then you've just reduced it and you've included these things which are completely unique. Allah Azza wa Jal is unlike every human being on earth. Allah is completely unique in terms of his existence. So if you want to call that subjective, go ahead, but then you've lost the reasons why subjective becomes problematic, because you've deleted that by including him in that pile, or in the pile of subjects, quote unquote. So, you know, this for me isn't an issue. The reason I say what Allah commands is objective is because of the attributes that he holds. It's because he is all-knowing, because he is wise, because he is just, because he is not finite like we are, and doesn't suffer from the things that plague us. And so I am happy to take his command, more so than I am happy to take the command of some arbitrary human being who suffers from these problems. We take our commands directly from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was sent by Allah Azza wa Jal and was picked for a particular reason. And we have our evidences for why Allah Azza wa Jal exists. We have our evidences for why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a messenger. And so I have good reason to trust their judgments, because Allah Azza wa Jal has that foresight. He sees things, you know, in terms of how they play out long term. So, you know, the human being has a habit. You only need to look at a child to see how this problem starts, and then you can extrapolate that to the adult, and the problem just becomes a bit bigger. So with the child, they want things, and they want it now because they can't think long term, or and they're ignorant in certain regards. So if it was up to my daughter, she'd just eat ice cream all day, every day. She'd just eat chocolate and biscuits and crap and crisp and popcorn, and she'd just live off that. And I tried telling her, no, you can't do that. And she's like, oh, you're an oppressor. Obviously, she's not saying it in these words. She's only 4. But like that's how she behaves when I say she can't have what she wants. And I say she can't have this, she can't have that. Because she's not even aware of her own ignorance. She just knows it tastes good, it feels good, now give it me now. But I can see a bit further into the future than she can. And I can see the problems that can come about because of this. Because I'm older, I have a bit more experience than she does. I'm a bit more savvy with the consequences of eating a crappy diet over a long period of time. And so I have more of a right to make a command upon her than she does upon herself. Now, that problem doesn't go away for the human being when they grow up. We still have limited sight. We still have limited knowledge. And so certain people, you see this with modern day politics. It's like, oh, but it doesn't really hurt anyone. It's like, you're saying that because your scope is so minimal. You're not thinking long term. So, for example, the deterioration of the nuclear family. Oh, why not let everyone just do what they want?
Do you think you can speak for the next 10 minutes, Yusuf? I just need to nip to the shops, yeah?
Was that sarcasm?
No. I literally have to nip to the shop to get some broccoli.
I can't just speak for 10 minutes, La.
Yeah.
Well, give it a rest because we're going. I need to go. I'm 5 minutes late. I need to go now. So let me finish and then we'll just end it.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I was supposed to go at 8, aren't I? I need to get off my devices.
Sorry for taking your time.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I like this question anyway. But are you cool with that answer? Or
yeah. We're going to keep talking.
Yeah. I'll wrap it up quickly. So so for the human being, it's still the same problem. So you look at the nuclear family, yeah, and they're like, oh, what's the problem with people just doing zina, doing what they want, and blah 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 blah. And they're just thinking, oh, but when we're just doing it and we're on our own, they've reduced the scope to someone just messing about with someone else. And they're not thinking long-term consequences on a societal scale. And then you go to any council estate in the UK and you see like the expression of this in more detail. You see lots of kids, you see lots of single parent families, dads with kids here and there, and they don't commit themselves to any of these families anymore because they can't be bothered. All of that dependency has been offloaded to a government. So the government's now under restraint. You look at, for example, what's the problem with alcohol? People just enjoying themselves. You look at the amount. The only reason alcohol is allowed in this state, in the West, is because it's profitable. And if you look at the damages, they allow the damages because it still makes some money. So the amount of strain on the NHS, for example, is huge, especially on the weekends. And the majority of that is caused because of problems induced by alcohol. Criminal damages on a yearly basis are huge because of people off their head, smashing windows and getting into fights. You look at the amount of people in prison, the victims.
Give me your 10 minutes, Yusuf, yeah?
I'll give you 10 minutes.
No, I have to go. Mrs. wants to eat. I've got to get some broccoli.
Okay,
You
okay,
just talk. Hold the fort.
All right. And so, yeah, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. Victims of violent crime, the majority of them are under the influence. Well, a large, I can't remember if it's a majority, but a large percentage of them are under the influence of alcohol. Perpetrators of violent crimes, especially things like murder, etc., are under the influence of alcohol. The costs are huge, and you think about the amount of costs, not just with that explicit, in terms of the damages or the costs because of health issues and things like that in hospital, people having to get their stomachs pumped, but the indirect costs in terms of like the yearly costs of prisoners that are in jail because they did something stupid while they were off their head on alcohol. And but if you lower the scale and like if you speak to people who are into the drinking scene, they're going to say, but it's no harm. You get the odd person who does something bad and blah blah blah. It's not just the odd person though. When you extrapolate this to a huge scale, you get huge problems with it. Like where I grew up, the amount of families that were done in because their parents were alcoholics. There was one lad who used to live down the road from me. His mum was an alcoholic, and his house was like, it was a mess. She didn't really care. She didn't really bother, and he was just left alone in like a room upstairs to do whatever he wanted. We used to go in there, and we just used to get drunk and take drugs and that in his bedroom. And his mum was just downstairs off her head, didn't know any different. And loads of kids used to go in, and there used to be like gangs of like 10, 15 lads in there sometimes, burning things into the roof and doing what they wanted. Like, that's just one example. And on council estates, there's hundreds of them. So the issue here is that Allah Azza wa Jal has the best advantage point in order to tell you what is right, what is wrong. He is all-knowing. He is all-wise. He is just. He is the merciful. He's in the perfect position with the perfect information in order to be able to give commands for how to organize a society. And human beings, we're so limited. We're just big children. We can see a little bit further than the kid, but we can't see much further than that in the grand scheme of things. And so we start making all these decisions, and we get sort of taken away with glamour and glitz and sparkly things. But at the core, there's a lot of suffering at the end of it. And it's just masked over with glitter. And that's the bottom of it. So I don't know. It was a bit of a ramble. Was that an answer to your question, Miriam? Did that make sense?
Yeah, yes, it makes sense. Especially when you said that God is all-knowing and He's like all-wise, and of course He knows the aftermath of actions, of our actions and everything. So I think I must take that into account, that we are finite, that we are. Like you said, we are children. We don't know any better. So thank you very much. Jazakallah khairan, barakallah.
They may still insist.
That's a nice explanation. I think to. Sorry.
Go on. No, go on.
Sorry, please. Go on. Please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that they may still insist on calling it subjective, but so long as you hone in the point that, well, what is it? Why do you think we critique subjective morality? The reasons are always linked to human qualities, which God does not have. So if we're saying subjective morality is problematic because X, Y, Z, and you say, but God's a subject, and you want to throw him in, it's like, well, no, because now we're changing the meaning of subjective here to just include people, to include agents, anything that's an agent. But that's just such a vague definition. Like, it's disregarding everything else. Like, because the reason we say, but we're not accepting that because it's subjective, is because it's linked to the human finitude, because we have particular tastes, we have particular desires, we have our own particular problems. Allah does not share any of these. So the criticism, when applied to humans, doesn't apply when applied to Allah Azza wa Jal. So if you want to call him a subject, he needs to go under a different category of subject, a category unique to him, because he has unique attributes. So this is, basically how I deal with it. And they just reduce these concepts, objective, subjective, to nothing. For me, forget that. We don't need to talk about objective and subjective. If you want to reduce it to subjective, fine. Who's in the better position to be able to give a command? You? Me? Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump. Who is it? Like all of us? Are crowds really great at making good decisions? There's studies that suggest that we're not. You have the madness of crowds. Like crowds can take you in very dark directions. You just look at Nazi Germany as a perfect example of that. Like crowds can make very bad decisions. And when they do, it's very difficult to stop those bad decisions, spiraling out of control. Crowds of people are not necessarily rational. You look like really good example was, and when Hamza gets back, he'll give you a good 10-hour conversation about this. But the Brexit, the UK was said, right, you got to make a decision now. Are we in the EU or out of the EU? I was like, I don't know. So I had to try and look into it a bit because they were telling me I needed to vote for it. I was like, and I looked into it. I was like, I don't understand all of that. I'm not no economist. I don't know the long-term issues that are going to come from any of this. Why is it? Why is it being put on my toes? And then you're looking at kids talking about it. It's like, why? What are you on about? Why are you voting? So go on. Why are you voting what? And then they'll tell you, and it's usually some clickbaity reason. It turned out to be a load of crap anyway, because the media said X, Y, Z. Oh, if we vote for Brexit, all this extra money that we were spending on the EU is going to go to the NHS. That turned out not to be true. And even if we voted the other way, it's like, what reasons were we voting the other way? Half of the time, like, people are just being carried about by their emotions. And everyone voted. And I'm asking them why. And on one side, it's like pushed by propaganda about immigrants are coming. They're going to get you. They're on the way. There's a big crowd. There's a line of them going across Europe now. They're coming. And they're showing you pictures of these like long lines of immigrants and that. And as if the Brexit was going to stop immigration from coming over. And it's not at all. We still have immigration. So, a lot of the things that motivated people to vote turned out just to be a load of nonsense. And even then, like, I tried to do more research than the average person, and I still didn't feel like I was qualified enough to vote, to make that decision. And 50%, it was nearly 50% voted one way, nearly 50% voted the other. And that was only half of the population. The other half of the population didn't even vote. So it was like near neck and neck tie, half of the population who probably didn't know, like, legitimate reasons for voting one way or the other. Like, it'd be interesting to like do a survey of like the knowledge level of the majority of the people and the reasons why they voted and whether or not they were legitimate reasons or well informed. And like, so it's not the case that these crowds can take you in the right direction. And if you want to like dictate morality based on the whims of a lot of people, you're going to get a lot of stupid things popping up. Like,
but I think that the point that I really liked what you said is that objective and subjective are terms that are very misleading, and that's what I will. I think I will work on it, because, as you said, it doesn't like objective. There's like finite terms, so finite properties to these words. So we can't apply them to God, to take God into this logical dialogue. But that's,
I don't even like using the word objective. Like, I just, because it's not even clear what people mean by it, and people get confused and they think objective. Oh well, it should always be the same no matter what. And it's like, well, hold on a second. You can have objective things that are conditional. Like, for example, the Einstein's theory of relativity, takes into account different perspectives, different conditions that give rise to different outcomes. And there is a relativity. It's called the theory of relativity. There is a relativity involved in there, but that's still understood to be an objective theory. It is objective, and the fact that you get different outcomes based on input, etc., can be input into the whole objective system. But with regards to law, it can be objectively the case, for example, that pig is haram. If someone says, "Can you eat pig as a Muslim?" What do you say? You say, "No, you cannot eat pig. It's not allowed. It's haram." But we know as well that there are circumstances where you're allowed to eat pig. The Quran says, if you're in dire circumstances and you're starving to death and there's no other food, eat what you can from it. Don't go too far. Don't just start like gorging out on pig. Eat enough so that you can survive, and then it's permissible. And so we've got a conditional law. if A happens, then eating pig is okay. If B happens, then eating pig is not okay. And so you have different circumstances allowing for different things. And so you can have a variance of outcome depending on the conditions of an environment. And the Sharia takes that into account. And people don't get that. So they'll hear, oh, well, why is it the case, for example, that, blah, 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 blah. How can it be objective if, what was made haram for the Jews is now halal for the Muslims, or vice versa? What used to be halal for the Jews is now haram for the Muslims. It's like, well, there can be conditions, and upon certain conditions being met, the law can transform or change, or there can be variance in it. That doesn't stop it from being objective. And again, for me, the whole conversation just becomes like people just look at these two terms in a very overly simplistic way. And I think personally,
exactly.